Look at a black woman who was stopped while driving. While she did not commit any violation, she was accused of being a suspect of theft. Why is this so absurd? Can anyone help her speak up? Let's watch the battle of justice to see who will win. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more interesting stories. The air inside the Hillsborough County Courthouse was thick with tension, as though the building itself could sense the impending storm. The sky outside was a heavy shade of gray, casting a somber shadow over the courthouse grounds. Rain began to drizzle, tapping against the windows, but it seemed like only the calm before the chaos. Inside, the usual hum of activity had been replaced by an uneasy stillness. The halls were quieter than usual, the kind of silence that preceded a pivotal moment, a moment that would alter lives. In courtroom 3B, the stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the courtroom's four walls. Isabel Harris, a 30-year-old black woman with a sharp, commanding presence, walked confidently through the door. Her tailored dark blue suit fit her perfectly, projecting both authority and professionalism. She was the chief legal advisor to Governor George Weston, a position she had fought hard for. Known for her tireless work on criminal justice reform, Isabel was a fierce advocate for fairness, transparency, and equal treatment within the judicial system. But today, as she walked into the courtroom, Isabel had no idea how dramatically her life was about to shift. She had always championed justice, believed in the fairness of the law, and never once thought she would find herself on the other side of it. As she took her seat, her eyes swept over the room, her calm demeanor betraying the storm of emotions brewing inside. The weight of the situation wasn't lost on her. This was more than just a legal case. It was a battle against a system that had failed far too many, and she was about to become an unwilling yet essential player in it. It was nearing midnight when Isabel Harris, chief legal advisor to Governor George Weston, drove through the quiet streets of Tampa. After a long day of reviewing criminal justice reform legislation at the governor's office, she was finally on her way home. The cool night air flowed in through the cracked window as she drove down a narrow, dimly lit street near her townhouse. The hum of her car's engine was the only sound, the peacefulness of the moment a stark contrast to the tension she would soon face. As she rounded a corner, the flashing lights of a police cruiser suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the speedometer. She was within the speed limit. She pulled over, wondering if it was just a routine stop. She tried to remain calm, but the uncertainty was unsettling. Officer Dalton, a tall and stocky man with a stern demeanor, stepped out of his vehicle and approached Isabel's car. She noted the name on his badge as he came closer. His eyes were already narrowed, filled with suspicion. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice cold. "I need to ask you a few questions." "Of course, officer," Isabel replied, her voice steady as she rolled down her window. "I noticed you were near an area where a theft was reported just hours ago," Dalton said, his eyes scanning her face. "A suspect was apprehended but mysteriously disappeared before being questioned. What's your business around here?" Isabel was taken aback. She had no idea what he was talking about. "I was at a meeting at the governor's office. I'm heading home now," she explained, trying to remain composed. "I assure you I have nothing to do with whatever happened." Dalton's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "A meeting, huh?" he said skeptically. "That's interesting." He continued with a series of rapid-fire questions. Where was she coming from? Where was she going? What was the meeting about? Isabel answered each question calmly and clearly, but she noticed his demeanor growing more tense with every answer. When she mentioned working for the governor, he frowned, his tone hardening. "You work for the governor?" he asked, sounding disbelieving. "Yes," Isabel replied firmly. "I'm the chief legal advisor." She didn't expect his reaction to her answer, but she knew the implications of being a black woman in a high-level position. It was always a point of skepticism in some circles, especially among those who weren't used to seeing women like her in such roles. Dalton paused, eyeing her closely. His next words caught Isabel off guard. "I think I smell alcohol coming from your vehicle," he said suddenly, leaning down to peer inside her car. Isabel froze. She hadn't had a drop to drink. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, officer," she said, trying to stay calm. "I haven't been drinking." "I'm not consenting to a vehicle search." Dalton's expression hardened. "Well, then I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction of justice." Isabel's stomach dropped. "What? That's not possible. I haven't done anything wrong." But it was too late. Before she could protest further, Dalton yanked her out of the car and slapped cold metal handcuffs around her wrists. The sharp sting of the cuffs was nothing compared to the shock of the situation. Isabel knew her rights. She had done nothing illegal. This arrest was based purely on suspicion, and it was all happening far too quickly. As she stood by the side of the road, trying to make sense of what was happening, Isabel realized something that made her heart sink further. She had just become another name in a long list of individuals who had fallen victim to an unjust system. She knew she would fight this, but in that moment, the overwhelming unfairness of it all settled in deep. As Officer Dalton read her rights, his voice was mechanical, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. Isabel's mind raced, not with fear for herself, but with fear for what this might mean if it went to court. How many others had faced this same treatment? How many others had been unjustly accused and left without a voice? The truth was clear. Being innocent wasn't always enough to protect someone from the system. After Isabel was released from custody, she could feel the weight of the wrongful arrest bearing down on her. Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger, deeply ingrained problem within the system. Isabel knew that clearing her name wasn't going to be enough. She had to take a stand against the injustice that had been allowed to flourish. Determined to uncover the truth, she reached out to the people she trusted most. Avery Mitchell, a seasoned civil rights attorney who had a reputation for challenging systemic corruption, was the first to answer her call. Avery had successfully litigated cases against the very institutions that perpetuated racial injustice. Alongside her, Isabel brought in Brian Lewis, the Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Weston. Brian was not only politically connected, but also deeply committed to justice. Together, they began to dig into the details of Isabel's arrest, determined to find the cracks in the system that allowed this kind of abuse. As they began their investigation, the pieces started falling into place. Officer Dalton, the arresting officer, had a troubling history. Isabel and her team uncovered a pattern of wrongful arrests, especially targeting black individuals. Many of these cases had been swept under the rug, with little to no accountability. It became clear that Dalton had been using his badge to harass and intimidate people without cause. But it wasn't just Dalton who was part of the problem. Judge Maximo Grant, the judge overseeing Isabel's case, was also at the center of a troubling web of bias and misconduct. His history of imposing excessive bail and harsh sentences on black defendants was well documented. Isabel felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about her. This was about a system that was fundamentally broken and needed to be exposed. The team worked tirelessly to build their case. Late one evening, as they sat in a quiet cafe near the state capitol, a man named Daniel Roberts approached their table. He introduced himself as a witness to Isabel's arrest, and he had something that could change everything: video footage from his phone. He had been driving by when he saw Officer Dalton pulling Isabel over. He had recorded part of the interaction, hoping to capture some of the incident, but not knowing at the time who Isabel was. Isabel's heart skipped a beat as Daniel played the footage. The video was shaky, but it clearly showed her complying with Dalton's requests and answering his questions calmly. The footage also showed Dalton's increasing aggression as the encounter went on. Isabel was struck by how the officer's demeanor shifted from routine questioning to outright hostility. His baseless accusation that Isabel was intoxicated, despite no evidence, was fully captured on the video. The footage contradicted Dalton's entire narrative. This was proof that Isabel had been wrongfully detained. "This is it," Avery said, her voice filled with awe as she examined the footage. "This is the piece of evidence we've been waiting for. It shows that Isabel was calm, cooperative, and that Dalton lied." Brian immediately sprang into action. "We need to authenticate this footage as quickly as possible. We can't risk them claiming it's doctored or unreliable. If we can get it verified, we'll have the leverage we need." Isabel felt a sense of relief wash over her for the first time since the arrest. They now had something concrete, something that couldn't be disputed. This video was the key to proving her innocence and exposing Dalton's misconduct. It was more than just her word against the officers. It was irrefutable proof of what had happened. With the footage in hand, the team got to work. They reached out to digital forensics experts to authenticate the video and ensure its integrity. Meanwhile, they continued gathering more evidence about Judge Grant's troubling history. They dug through court records, looking for patterns of biased rulings and unjust sentences. It didn't take long to uncover a series of cases where Grant had imposed excessive bail and handed down harsh sentences to black defendants, often without clear justification. His record was riddled with instances of selective justice, and it was clear that his actions were part of a larger issue of systemic racism within the courts. The pieces were starting to fit together, and Isabel felt the walls of injustice slowly begin to crumble. But she knew they still had a long road ahead. The more evidence they gathered, the more the stakes grew. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system and fighting for real change. As the investigation progressed, Isabel's determination hardened. She wasn't just a victim of the system. She was going to be the one to bring it down. With Avery, Brian, and now Daniel's crucial footage, they had the ammunition to fight back. Isabel was ready for the battle that lay ahead, knowing that the fight wasn't just for her freedom, but for the countless others who had been wrongfully treated by a system that failed them. The fight for justice was just beginning, and Isabel Harris was ready to lead the charge. After weeks of digging into Isabel's arrest and building their case, her legal team felt confident that they were on the right track. The video footage from Daniel Roberts had already proven that Officer Dalton's claims about Isabel were false. But they knew that a single piece of evidence wouldn't be enough to win the case, especially against powerful figures like Dalton and Judge Maximo Grant. Isabel's team filed a formal petition for Judge Grant to recuse himself, citing his history of bias and unfair rulings, particularly against black defendants. They believed his track record was a clear conflict of interest, and that it would be impossible for him to deliver a fair verdict. Isabel was hopeful that with mounting evidence, Grant would step aside, but to her dismay, the judge refused. His response came swiftly, a simple dismissal, full of arrogance, stating that his record spoke for itself. His refusal to recuse himself revealed the depth of his corruption and his belief that he was untouchable. The legal system, it seemed, had given him free rein to impose his biased judgments. Isabel's frustration simmered, but she wasn't about to let this setback defeat her. "This is exactly what we've been fighting against," Avery said, her voice tight with anger. "He's not even trying to hide his bias anymore, but this only strengthens our case. We can't back down now." Despite Judge Grant's refusal, the team kept pushing forward, knowing that they couldn't rely on just one piece of evidence. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A private investigator, hired by Isabel's team, managed to recover dashcam footage from Officer Dalton's patrol car, a piece of evidence that had been dismissed as lost due to technical issues. The footage had been the key missing element in the case, and now, after weeks of delay, it had surfaced. Isabel, Avery, and Brian gathered in a conference room to watch the footage. It wasn't perfect. Some frames were corrupted, and the audio wasn't completely clear, but the key moments were undeniable. The video clearly showed Isabel complying with Dalton's instructions, answering his questions calmly, and showing no signs of aggression or belligerence. On the other hand, Dalton's actions were escalating, and his false claim that Isabel was intoxicated was captured for the world to see. Avery's eyes widened as she examined the footage. "This is it," she said. "This is the evidence we've been waiting for. This completely contradicts Dalton's story." Isabel was calm, cooperative, and he made up everything. Brian immediately took charge. "We need to authenticate this footage as soon as possible. This is the smoking gun that will turn everything in our favor." Isabel felt a wave of relief wash over her. For weeks, she had felt like she was fighting a losing battle. But now, with this crucial evidence, they had a powerful tool to fight back. The footage was undeniable, and with it, Isabel felt like she finally had the upper hand. The team quickly arranged for the footage to be verified by experts, ensuring that its authenticity would hold up in court. Meanwhile, they continued to build their case against Officer Dalton and Judge Grant, gathering records of past cases where Grant had unfairly sentenced black defendants and where Dalton had engaged in similar unjust arrests. Isabel was starting to see a clearer path forward. "This isn't just about clearing my name anymore," Isabel said, her voice firm. "This is about exposing the corruption that has been allowed to thrive for far too long. If we don't take a stand now, nothing will ever change." With the recovered dashcam footage in hand, Isabel and her team prepared for the next phase of the battle. The fight was far from over, but now they had undeniable evidence to bring the truth to light. Isabel was ready to face whatever came next. She had the truth on her side, and that was more powerful than any corrupt system could ever be. The courtroom was charged with tension as Isabel's legal team prepared to present their case. With the dashcam footage authenticated and expert forensic analysis confirming its authenticity, Isabel couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and anxiety. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. Avery stood and presented the footage once again to the court. The video clearly showed Isabel calmly cooperating with Officer Dalton, while Dalton's increasingly aggressive behavior was undeniable. His baseless accusations about Isabel being intoxicated were shown to be completely false, and the forensic analysis provided the final proof that the footage had not been tampered with. The evidence against Dalton was now overwhelming. As the video played, Judge Grant sat in silence. His expression was hard to read, but it was clear the evidence was having an effect. Avery addressed the court, asking for all charges against Isabel to be dropped and for an investigation into Officer Dalton's actions. She demanded accountability for the false accusations and misconduct that had nearly ruined Isabel's life. The room fell silent as Judge Grant pondered the request. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "All charges against Miss Harris are dismissed. An investigation into Officer Dalton's actions will be initiated immediately." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Isabel had won the first battle, but she knew this was just the beginning. The decision was a victory, but there was more work to do. Officer Dalton was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, and soon enough, Judge Grant's own actions came under scrutiny. The pressure on him grew as his history of biased rulings was uncovered, and the public outcry was impossible to ignore. Eventually, Grant was forced to step down, his misconduct revealed for all to see. Isabel's heart swelled with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. The victory was sweet, but she knew this was far from over. "This isn't just about me," she said to Avery and Brian. "The real fight for justice is still ahead. This case exposed a broken system, and we need to keep pushing for change." Isabel remained committed to pushing for judicial reform. While she had won the fight for her own freedom, she understood that this was only the beginning. The system that allowed Officer Dalton and Judge Grant to abuse their power was still intact, and many others had fallen victim to it. Isabel was determined to continue her work, fighting not just for herself, but for every person who had been unjustly treated by the system. With the battle ahead, Isabel knew that the road to true justice would be long. But as she walked out of the courtroom, her resolve was stronger than ever. She had taken the first step towards changing the system, and she would not stop until justice was truly served for all. Isabel's journey had been a fight not only for her own freedom, but for the countless others who had been silenced by a broken system. The injustice she faced was not isolated. It was part of a larger pattern that disproportionately targeted people of color, especially those with little power to defend themselves. Isabel's victory was a testament to the power of resilience, the unyielding pursuit of truth, and the strength to stand against corruption and prejudice. Her story proved that even when the system is stacked against you, the truth, backed by perseverance, can shine through. Isabel had faced overwhelming odds, false accusations, a biased judge, and an officer who abused his power. Yet, through it all, she never wavered. She refused to allow her voice to be silenced. In her struggle, she became a symbol of hope for those who felt powerless, showing that one individual's courage could make a difference. But Isabel's victory wasn't just personal. It was a victory for everyone who had been wronged by a system that too often failed to deliver justice. Her fight for accountability had exposed deep flaws in the judicial system, but it also highlighted the need for reform. The abuses she had experienced were not rare. They were part of a larger issue that needed to be addressed. Her case was a catalyst for change, not just in the courtroom but in the hearts of those who had watched her battle unfold. Isabel's determination inspired others to fight for their rights, to demand accountability, and to challenge a system that had long allowed injustice to thrive. The real lesson from Isabel's story was clear. The fight for justice is ongoing, and the work of changing the system is far from over. But with courage and resilience, real change is possible.